Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well today. Um, so today's talk is on compassionate capitalism with Blaine Bartlett. So excited to have you guys all here. Um, for those who are kind of new to Community of Seven and our Let's Talks, please enter your name, your company. If you're in transition, let us know what field you're in and what you're looking for. Maybe this community can kind of help you find your next gig. But tell us what city you're from. Feel free to add your LinkedIn profile if you want to connect with other folks in the community. For those who are on LinkedIn Live, YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter live stream, we want you in this conversation as well. So tell us where you're coming from in the comments. So tell us, introduce yourself, give us your name. Also, feel free to connect with each other as well. Ask questions in the comment, and I'll try to check them throughout the conversation. So once again, the focus on today's call is on compassionate capitalism with Blaine Bartlett. For those new here, there's one singular purpose of these Let's Talk calls, and it's to create an environment where you could come as you authentically are. So where you are accepted and where you have conversations with others who are purpose focused as well, right? And we talk about things that matter the most to us. And for those who are live in the Zoom audience, if you can turn on your video because we really want you in the conversation. For those on live stream, we want you a part of the conversation. So make sure you comment in, comment and post wherever you're watching this from, and introduce yourselves. So quick exercise, you guys know the deal. Top right-hand side, put this in gallery mode so you should see everyone. We should look like the Brady Bunch grid, right? So you should be able to see everyone. For those new to Let's Talk, we always start our calls with a quick series of questions to kind of level set. You're gonna raise your hand like this if the answer is yes. If you're on live stream on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, or Twitter, in the comments, I want you to write, you can't raise your hand, right? So you're gonna say yes or no. So first question, in your opinion, do you think corporations should have a moral obligation to do good and provide value in the world? Do you believe that profit should be the main motivator for corporations? Do you feel that companies should take a stance on social justice? How about environment and sustainability? Okay. As an employee, would you not take a job for a company's political stance? So you disagree with their political stance and you would not take a job because of their political stance. How about if they lack a political stance on a matter that you care deeply about? How many of you would not purchase from a business whose values are not aligned with yours? Does a company's purpose impact your purchasing decision? Do you think a CEO's point of view should impact the brand's voice? Okay, so for the next part, top right-hand side, you should put this on speaker mode. So you should probably just see me. Hello, guys. So excited to have Blaine on this call today. It's going to be a really great conversation. And if you haven't picked it up, his book, Compassionate Capitalism, you probably can't see, but I dog-eared everything. And there's so many, I'm one of those types of, I am one of those readers who underlines everything, but it's such a great book. Pick it up if you can. I'm also going to put the Amazon link in the comments for you as well. So this talk is so timely, and I'm so excited to have Blaine as a guest. Just yesterday, I spoke on a panel at the Interactive Marketing Research Conference about using tech for social justice. There's a tidal wave of change. In a lot of ways, it's leaders like Blaine and CEOs like Jamie Dimon from Chase and countless other thought leaders and titans of industries who have made this change possible. If you think about how groundbreaking it was that leading CEOs like Jamie Dimon, arguably the most powerful CEO in the world, moved the Business Roundtable to change its statement of purpose from declaring that companies should serve only shareholders and basically creating profit, and moving it to the belief that companies and corporations need to deliver value to their stakeholders, which now widened that to customers, employees, suppliers, the community. This was earth-shattering move away from profit at all cost. Um, it was a movement from Milton Friedman's ideology of shareholder value that has made a devastating impact on workers' rights, our environment, and social justice in the United States. Just 10 years ago, it would have been unfathomable that leading CEOs would unify an agreement that business has a purpose beyond profit. So remember, this just happened in 2019, right? And the Business Roundtable has been around for over 50 years. So the impact moving forward is tremendous. So time will only tell, but just think of how many CEOs and companies have spoken up to social justice and equality in the past 5 years. From Charlottesville to George Floyd to the recent Asian violence that's happened in the past year, we've seen increasingly CEOs and leaders of companies who once stood by the sideline now vocally opposing inequities in society. This is a seismic shift. Now, in terms of why purpose and doing good is good for business, right? Here's some general stats. You want top millennials. Millennials expect and demand diversity. 55% of Americans say it is no longer acceptable for companies to be silent on social justice issues. 40% of Americans assume that companies that remain quiet on social justice issues don't care. So it's not just a matter of being vocal. When you're silent, you're also saying that you don't care. More than half, or 58% of employers today, say that they hold their employers to a higher standard than other companies when it comes to addressing social justice issues. A study by PwC found that 85% of females agreed that employers' policy on diversity and equality was important when deciding whether to work for an employer or not. And you're not going to get top millennial and Gen Z talent if you don't have it. 43% say they are reconsidering their current job because their company is not doing enough to address social justice issues externally. 66% would consider a company's purpose when making a purchase decision. And 71% would purchase from a purpose-driven company over an alternative. And lastly, in terms of commitments to social responsibility, 1/3 of consumers will choose to purchase from brands that they see doing social and environmental good. Consumers care now more than ever about business transparency surrounding diversity, inclusion, and social responsibility. And diversity and inclusion are a critical way in which businesses can demonstrate their commitment to social justice. Here's the bottom line. Brands that don't take a social stance on social impact, sustainability, and DEI, and don't add that into their strategy, will have a reckoning in the next decade when an increasingly diverse millennial and Gen Z, and now Gen A, come to age. So demographic trends and projections on size and composition of the US population is telling us that the United States is becoming more diverse. Most companies aren't going to do something because it's the right thing to do. They're doing it because it can have an impact on their bottom line. So we need to make sure we're able to tell the story and the justification for purpose and social justice in the same way. So quick activity before I introduce Blaine. In your opinion, And I want you to type this in the comments. For those who are on live stream, do the same, but don't press send until I tell you. So if you're watching on the live stream, I want you to type this in the comment as well. In your opinion, is it a moral imperative that capitalism change to focus on bringing value into the world? And say yes or no. And if you want, you can have your comments as well. So press send. Yes, I guess see a lot of yes, not a lot of no's. Awesome. And the same as well with LinkedIn and the live stream. So I think it's a resounding yes. I didn't see any no's out there. It might be also the audience, right? So excited to have, let me find Blaine so I can pin him. I lost him. Where are you? Hold on.
I'll wave.
I know you're, oh, there you are. It's like there's so many people. And so I, technology, sorry. Hi guys, okay. So Blaine, so excited to have you here. So before I introduce you though, there's a quote in your book, Compassionate Capitalism, that really struck me. And I think those who know me know that I love quotes just a little bit, right? So it's a quote from Gandhi, and he talks about the 7 things that will destroy us or destroy society. And it's this: wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, religion without sacrifice, politics without principle, science without humanity, and business without ethics. So I am so excited to introduce today's guest, Blaine Bartlett. Blaine is internationally respected and sought after executive coach, a management consultant, keynote speaker, and organizational leadership development expert. He is the president and CEO of Avatar Resources, a leading consulting firm founded in 1987 with 4 affiliate offices in 4 countries. He is a adjunct professor at Chinese Beijing University and is on the teaching faculty of the American Association for Physician Leadership. He is the author of the #1 international best-selling Compassionate Capitalism, A Journey to the Soul of Business. His first book, Discover Your Inner Strength, was written in collaboration with some of my favorite authors, Stephen Covey, Ken Blanchard, and Brian Tracy, and it was published in 2010. His second book, 3-Dimensional Coaching, Passion into Performance, and it was also published in China in 2015. Blaine is considered a major innovative voice in the areas of executive coaching, leadership development, organizational development, and change management. Blaine, so excited to have you here. So tell us a little bit more. In your book, you talk a lot about kind of how you grew up, right? And how nature, and you grew up on a farm. Tell us a little bit about that experience and what compassionate capitalism means to you.
Boy, that is a broad question, Lan. Thank you for such a gracious host and also for inviting me to be on the show. I greatly appreciate it. Yeah, I did. I grew up on a farm in rural Oregon, and you know, nature is probably the best teacher if we really take time to notice what's there. And I mention that because when I started looking at the writing of this book, and I'll just kind of answer this question in this way, I got really curious about obviously where capitalism came from, and that was not a question that I was with just to write this book. I mean, when I was studying economics at university, I absolutely was familiar with The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith's book, which was the first actually written treatise on any kind of economics. But what I was interested in was, where did he get this notion of what he called the invisible hands of commerce? And it came out of his walks through nature. He wrote a book about 17 years before he wrote The Wealth of Nations, which was called The Theory of Moral Imperative. And essentially what that theory was, it was in part an answer to Rene Descartes and a couple of other folks beginning to look at man, and I'll use the word generically here, man being the uber species on the planet, and that we are separate from everything that is in our domain. We are masters of, and then fill in the blank. But that notion of separateness started to play out very largely in Adam Smith's query about how is reality actually constructed and how does economics come into play with that. So the idea of the theory of moral imperative was that we are in fact all connected. We're sourced from the same font, so to speak. And it was that invisible hands notion where there is reciprocity in trade. If you're winning, I'm winning. And if you're not winning as a trading partner, I'm not going to win. So that reciprocity was absolutely ecumenical to Adam Smith's notion of wealth of nations. That was kind of the foundation of what came to be known as capitalism. Smith didn't call it capitalism. It came out of nature. It came out of his appreciation for natural systems. The only truly free market system is nature. It's the only one that is that's not inhibited by artifice. It's actually free to transact quote unquote business in a way that is ultimately generative. The whole idea around nature is everything is positioned to facilitate thriving, And that was one of the things that Adam Smith was looking at is how does our economic models enable thriving for humankind, for all that is in play on this planet. So that's kind of a down a rabbit hole sort of an explanation, but it was my walking in nature. It was my being out in the fields harvesting hay in the summer, noticing what was going on, the planting. And the little tiny seeds would go in the ground and something miraculous would occur. And all of a sudden I've got an 8 foot tall corn stalk that has appeared from someplace. How did all of that happen? And then when it died, what happened to the detritus? What happened when it was ground back up into the soil again? Well, everything was recycled. Nothing was thrown away. Nothing went to waste. It was all there was just reciprocity everywhere. So that's kind of what kind of generated my initial thinking around the way that we've got capitalism tuned in is not working in the way that it was intended.
And you mentioned in your book that there was a kind of a pivotal moment, and I'm sure there was many, but you mentioned kind of Ayn Rand, Fountainhead, and her kind of philosophy, and then later Milton Friedman, and kind of like the Alan Greenberg, and like kind of the shift. Can you talk more about like how capitalism kind of shifted from what you're just kind of mentioning in terms of Adam Smith and capitalism to what we now have, which is this more, about self-interest, like how did that move to what we know of capitalism today?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we go back to 1776, when Adam Smith actually wrote The Wealth of Nations, economies had been in place for some time. We had feudal economies and we had serfs and masters, and I mean, all of these lords of the land and that sort of thing. So there was economic interplay going on far before the book was written that became, the basis for capitalism. But where things started to get off the rails, I think, was when it began to become codified in business practice, when the courts started to rule that there were things that corporations held that were akin to personhood. And the legal doctrine of a corporation is, in fact, a legal entity. With the rights that granted to legal entities. I mean, all of those sorts of things started to come into play with the charter of corporation. And what was interesting was initial corporations. Some of the very first corporations were incorporated with definite lifespans. They weren't intended to run in perpetuity, and they were incorporated as long as, and they were to remain viable as long as they were contributing to the overall welfare of society. So there was that, and this is a broad generality, but there was that piece in place. Fast forward, and we start looking at some of the literature that started appearing in the 50s, and this is where I would, I marked out Ayn Rand in the book. But Adam Smith was talking about enlightened self-interest. Ayn Rand and her contemporaries at that time, and I loved Ayn Rand when I read Fountainhead, and Atlas Shrugged, and these books. I was in university, and it's kind of like, and I came out of the West, and I came from a farm, self-reliance. It was kind of like, boy, they were speaking my language. There was something seductive about that, but then when I started, kind of unbundling it, there was something different that was in play, and it wasn't enlightened self-interest. It was rational self-interest. Enlightened self-interest is how are we both benefiting? How are we, as trading partners? How is everybody benefiting? Enlightened self-interest is one thing. Rational self-interest, and this is where Ayn Rand went to, and ultimately Milton Friedman and others. What's in it for me? What's the best action that I can take that will benefit me? And it was that rational self-interest that really marked the beginning where things really heavily started skewing. And you'll look at that, and it's about that time that CEO pay started to outpace on a statistical basis the pay of the employees. I mean, it was a dramatic increase. There was a lot of separation that started coming to place, and the shift towards stakeholder, particularly, excuse me, shareholder supremacy came into play about that time. And prior to that, stakeholders were a broader term. So that move towards rational self-interest is when things really started getting wonky. It started to get very what's the word I'd use here? Unsustainable. Beginning in the 50s. And, it was a slow migration, but it really accelerated in the 70s and particularly picked up steam in the 80s. And this is where you started seeing huge disparities in wealth. The wealth gap that we experience today it's unprecedented. We had wealth gaps back in the 1900s, early 1900s, but nothing like we have today. And the cost of that is social unrest. The cost of that is political unrest. There's incredible prices to be paid for that kind of disparity. And when we've got the top 1% in the country holding 90% of the wealth, that's kind of a crazy formula for success in anybody's book. So that whole move, that migration, and this is where I mean, in Milton Friedman, the purpose of a business is the purpose of a corporation. The purpose of a business is to make a profit. With all deference to Milton Friedman, no, it's not. The purpose of business is to uplift the experience of being alive on this planet.
So
That's the purpose of any.
I'm going to ask a controversial question. Do you think capitalism is inherently evil?
Not inherently. I think there's an old organizational development joke. We went away and we designed the perfect organization, and we screwed it up when we put people in it. And I think that's what we're working with today, is we've got people that don't have the conscious awareness or the awareness of consciousness to speak to how it can be different. And money and power corrupt. They truly do. And the purpose of business, like I was saying, is to uplift the experience of being alive on this planet. And I don't think that businesses serve that to a large degree any longer. And this is where compassion comes into play. And I use the word compassionate capitalism because it truly is an oxymoron in many people's experience.
So how
I
do you
don't think
move
capitalism in and of itself, nothing is inherently evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just how we actually execute on it that makes the consequences either sacred or profane.
so how do we move it from this kind of rational self-interest to and profit, at all costs, to now being kind of purpose focused on, I mean, I guess the first step was the Business Roundtable changing their charter, and
Yeah,
their mission statement was huge.
yeah.
But how do we get to that next step, and how can we as citizens advocate for this?
Uh, we vote with our dollars. That's one way. We actually shop and frequent organizations and support organizations that have a social responsibility component to what they do. That's one step. The second, I mean, the roundtable is a great example of this. I mean, in any business, from an accounting perspective, what gets measured gets paid attention to. So I'm part of the World Business Academy. It's a think tank that's been around for about 40 years now. I'm on their board of directors, have been for a number of years. And the Academy was one of the founding members of something that's called Just Capital. And Just Capital is essentially a way to begin to measure business in a different way and business successes in a different way. And it was forged primarily as a catalyst to the Fortune 100 or the Fortune 500 listing, which tended to focus primarily on the traditional metrics of success for business. The Just 100, the Just Capital metrics are different than that. They do look at social responsibility and environmental soundness. Um, I mean, just a whole number of different factors that are not solely or singularly focused on the profit of the organization or the ROI to the shareholders,
So the
the
importance of
stakeholder.
measurement in a lot of ways. I love that example of
Importance of measurement.
just capital, but also the Peter Drucker is one of my favorite quotes. What gets measured gets managed. I paraphrase
Yeah,
it: what gets measured gets done. Um, but here's the thing: all of these companies, especially with George Floyd happening, there's this whole movement of CEOs saying D&I, diversity and inclusion, was important. Yet when you peel the onion, of all of the companies that were vocal, their increase in staffing of D&I did not move at all, like not an inch, right? And those were the companies that were vocal about the importance of D&I, DE&I.
hmm
The other thing too is that many of these companies that did the CEO pledge, right? That PwC, the CEO of PwC, forgetting what the name of it was, the CEO action, which was to
actions.
basically pledge that diversity and inclusion would be important, that they would mandate hiring of diverse talent.
Mhm.
Only 3% of Fortune 500 companies actually list the ethnicity, race, and demographics of their employees and their hires
Yep.
in their yearly report. So it
Right.
seems almost ingenuous that they're saying that it's important, but they're not tracking the data so that they can actually move the needle.
Just Capital, that is one of the metrics that Just Capital pays attention to. Is diversity, inclusion, and dynamic. I mean, all of that stuff starts to get bundled in. We're playing catch up, and we're also trying to. I kind of liken it to rowing up, rowing next to the Queen Mary, kicking the Queen Mary in the bow, saying "Turn, turn, turn." First of all, we got to get the attention of the person at the helm, or the persons at the helm. And then, I mean, just given the inertia, it will take a long time to turn the vessel. And that's essentially, I think, what we're working with right now. And I'm very encouraged by a lot that's going on today. I truly am. I mean, part of it is it starts with making noise. It
Mhm.
really does. It starts with making noise.
And I have
That
to say,
this is no longer tolerable.
you've been at the forefront of this, because if you think about it, the Business Roundtable change only happened in
19.
2019. You've
Yeah.
been drumming this whole compassionate capitalism for well over a decade, maybe 2 decades or more. So you've been really at the
Good point.
forefront. What have you done on your side in terms of like mobilizing like leaders and CEOs of companies to kind of like push for this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've noticed receptivity that wasn't here 20 years ago. And I say receptivity. in the minds and in the actions of the leaders that I work with. And I work with leaders all around the world that have some pretty large footprints and some pretty large organizations that they're working with. And I also am working with a lot of smaller startups today, entrepreneurs, and Gen Z, millennials that are actually beginning to do some things. The I approach business as a spiritual discipline. I guess that would be the easiest way for me to begin to position this. And if people will begin to think of business, if I'm running a business and I enter it as a spiritual discipline, what it calls out is the best of who I am. I need to grow myself before I can grow my business in the way that we're thinking of doing this. And part of the way that that works is a recognition, and this is where the title Compassionate Capitalism came into play. Yeah, I was in a conversation with John Mackey, who was the founder of CEO of Whole Foods, co-founder of Whole Foods, and Raj Sisodia, professor of business at Babson College. Raj and John wrote Conscious Capitalism, and I've sat with Kip Tindall out at his place. Kip founded the Container Store. Starbucks, Howard Schultz. I've talked with him about what I'm. These are folks that they approach this as a spiritual discipline, and the idea of conscious capitalism, as opposed to compassionate capitalism. Conscious capitalism is an awareness of connection. That everything, and this is, it starts to broaden the stakeholder conversation. I'm aware that there are others out there that are impacted by my decisions and our business's decisions. That awareness isn't enough. Compassion is the behavioral analog to the consciousness of connection. It's impossible for me to be compassionate about something that I don't feel connected to or with. So my answer to this question about how do I do this is it's forging an awareness of connection, which needs to happen before compassion can come into play as the operative discipline for how we conduct our business. I make compassionate decisions. I make compassionate choices. And compassion is not soft. Compassion has a hard edge to it. I have to make some very hard decisions if I'm working from compassionate capitalism. Then those decisions are organized around, how do I design a product so that it doesn't get thrown away, because there is no way to throw it to. So I need to design recyclability into the process. And I recognize that there's a cost to that. I mean, Howard Schultz was brilliant with this. I think when he closed down the stores, I think it was 7 years ago, something like that. Wall Street thought he was crazy. He closed them down because they got away from the purpose of the business. He was saying, we are not connected to who we say we are. I want to fix that. So he closed down every store in the United States and did conversations. He brought people in and they sat people down and said, here's our values. Here's what we need to do. Here's how we organize around those.
Talking about values, one of I was watching, I think it was your TED Talk or one of your other interviews, and you said something that was really mind-blowing for me. And you said that the purpose of business as it is today is not about providing value. It's solely about profit. And then you kind of talked about like the whole nature of like, short-term returns, quarterly returns, which kind of really focuses companies on, making revenue and profit and not looking at the long-term ramifications of how it impacts like communities and even their customer base, if you think about it, right? Because if your customer base, if they don't have jobs, they're not going to buy your product, right? And I think Hershey knew this intimately, where he actually built a housing for his employees because he realized that they were also his customers.
Yeah. Henry Ford, the 5-day work week didn't magically just appear one day. Henry Ford actually organized a 5-day work week because he wanted to give his workers weekends so that they could drive the cars that they are now able to buy. I mean, there's that, there's a mercantile incentive, to this. It's not just altruistic.
One of the things that Mark Pritchard, who was kind of my quasi mentor when I was at See Her, he's a chief brand officer at P&G, and one of the things he said would always say that I've taken to heart is companies need to be a force for good and a force for
Hmm.
growth. You need to understand and connect that growth piece. And um, I've always been into, like, how do we create value in society and do good for the world? And I've always understood that you need to create a metric around that. What gets measured gets done. But you also have to tie growth and revenue with the doing good part, because otherwise it just becomes philanthropy and it sits like in a dusty basement. You need to
Yeah,
tie it to, the growth of the company in a lot of ways.
absolutely. I mean, I mean, when the purpose of business is to, make it possible for thriving to occur, that includes for the business as well. I mean, if I'm not making money, I mean, I'm very serious about that. I love money. I love making money. If I'm not making money, I'm going to go out of business. Yeah, I can't
Yeah.
sustain the enterprise. How I make that money makes a difference.
So
How I make that money makes a difference.
I'm cherry picking a question from the live stream. Someone, Brandon M from LinkedIn, asked, should we really be mixing politics and business at a certain level? What's your POV on that? Because, it's kind of like, don't talk about money, don't talk about politics, don't talk about,
Mhm.
you know, like, what is your POV on this? Like, should we be mixing politics and business, or is it something that should be church and state?
Yeah, the idea of separation never works. Building a Chinese firewall, so to speak, around any aspect of human existence or life isn't sustainable. It takes too much energy to keep that firewall in place. So, business is the most pervasive force on the planet. There is nothing on this planet that isn't touched by the activity of business in some way, shape, or form. I mean, we've got microplastics in the Mariana, at the bottom of the Mariana Trench right now. We've got microplastics in the atmosphere. Businesses' activities touch everything. And as a consequence of that, political borders, national borders, economic borders are incredibly permeable to businesses' activities. Business can't not have a political component to it. Politics is about power. That's all that politics is ever about, is power. Who has it, who doesn't. And business has power. It has power to change. It has power to do evil. It has power to do good. And those are political decisions. They truly are.
Yeah.
So, if we recognize that everything is connected and the purpose is to uplift the experience of being alive on this planet, what we do with that power is fundamentally different than if we're looking at what's in it for me. How do I consolidate my power base? Those are two completely different come froms.
Love
One's
that.
predicated on compassion and connection, the other is predicated on separation and scarcity.
Mhm. Love that. Marie Helene, you have a great question. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Thanks, Lan. Hi, Blaine. Great to meet you. I have
You as
taken
well,
so many.
Marie.
I have taken so many notes. Super fascinating. I had a question about, the topic here on capitalism. We talk about shareholders, the short term. What's your view about mutual companies, and where do they fit within this whole conversation?
Um, there are some mutual funds that are actually being assembled right now that are populated by what I'm calling compassionate companies. So I think investors will have the opportunity, and they do, in fact, now have opportunity to invest in these types of companies. Yeah, doing good is a great business model. I mean, I mentioned Raj Sisodia. Raj wrote a book before he and John wrote Conscious Capitalism, and I love the title of this book. The book he wrote was called Firms of Endearment. Firms of Endearment. And it's a fascinating book. And it looks at companies that are set up to do good. And they actually, most of these companies that he identified had love in their chartered values. They actually organized around the premise of love, not "oh my goodness, I love you" sort of thing, but love in the sense of agape love. We're all connected, and these companies outperformed the S&P. These companies outperformed Jim Collins' good to great companies, and they outperformed them in sustainable ways. So doing good is a business model that pays benefit. It truly does. And part of the metric has to do with employee retention. If we look at the great resignation that's going on right now today, and this, I'm going down a rabbit hole, Marie, so excuse me here, but yeah, you can find ways to invest in these kinds of companies from, in a mutual fund collective. You just have to do a little bit of searching right now. But part of the stakeholder is my employee group. I'll get back into my rabbit hole here. The Great Resignation is a consequence of businesses treating people as if they are disposable cogs in a wheel. They aren't disposable cogs in a wheel. I think one of the biggest fallacies that we tell ourselves as business leaders is that our people are our greatest asset. I think that's bullshit. Truly, excuse my language. But what you do with assets on a balance sheet in an organization is you depreciate them over time for tax purposes. Assets are depreciated. Assets are also meant to be used, and make no mistake about it, in most organizations, people feel depreciated and they feel used. And as a
My
consequence,
mind is blown right now. I just that like depreciation. I think you mentioned another kind of word too.
resource people are our greatest resource.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Um,
and it has
so
the same linguistic charge to it.
so
Resources are used.
let's talk more about this great resignation, because why now? I mean, I know COVID just happened. People are stressed. People feel underutilized and underused, and toxic boxes, toxic cultures. Why now? I mean, it's this phenomenon is crazy, because I have a lot of friends who are CEOs and C-suite executives hiring people, and they're just like, people are leaving in droves without jobs
Yep.
lined up. This is unprecedented. Why now?
Yeah. There was a great pattern interrupted in the last 2 years, and that pattern, habituated way of engaging work, got significantly perturbed in the last 18 months. Significantly perturbed. And anytime you interrupt a pattern, something new can be introduced. And that something new in this case had to do with people beginning to get reconnected to what's meaningful to them. I really believe this is a large part of what's going on with this. Being in a car commuting 4 hours a day, 2 hours one direction, 2 hours the other, is not a meaningful way to live my life. My time is a non-renewable resource. I don't get to go out and buy more time. And people are looking at, where do I spend my time? I just got my hair cut today, and I was talking to my stylist, and and he was
Nice
saying,
haircut.
yeah, thank you. He did a good job. But he was saying, I'm not willing to do some of the things I was doing before, because I've spent time, and he's got a young daughter. I've been spending time with my daughter, and all of a sudden, he was saying, oh, yeah, in this last year, I've started really appreciating what it meant to actually spend time, to invest time with my daughter, not just to be there sometimes, just to really be a father, not to be a caretaker when I came home at the end of the day and put her to bed and fed her. So that meaning. And also, I think people also have had the experience of autonomy. And autonomy is a very interesting thing. When you look at what motivates people in life, if they have the experience of autonomy, agency, I get to do what I know I can do when I can do it. So autonomy is an important piece. It has to do with freedom, personal meaning, what's meaningful for me to do. And then people have a desire to be good at something. And then we were talking just before the show. My next book coming out is titled "Be a Good One," the journey from being good to mastery, the journey from good to grace. From good to grace. Masters do things gracefully, beauty. So this is a long, answer to the question here, but I think what's happened in the last 18 months is people have had the opportunity to experience autonomy. They've had the opportunity to experience access to meaning, and they've had the opportunity to start questioning, how am I being utilized in my life? What am I actually trying to master when in this thing that I call my life? And when mastery, when autonomy, and when purpose or meaning come together, you've got people that are intrinsically motivated to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And it's not an external motivator, it's an internal motivator. So people are jumping out of jobs even though they don't have one to go to because they know there's something better. They
I'm
know that they
looking at
can't.
Will Sullivan right now as you speak, because literally that is Will. Will, do you have any questions? I know you always have a good question to
I have
ask.
tons of questions and too many comments, and I know there's limited time, but I think the topic, Blaine and Lan, around work, right? One of my followers and someone who used to work with me saw that I was attending this, and she wrote in a comment saying, yeah, sure, capitalism and good people, they don't mix, right? So I said, hang on, watch the recorded version. So Susan, if you're watching, please understand here. But I suppose I'm a little less hopeful, and I'd love your point of view, Blaine, on whether or not those at the top, CEOs, can actually get this. I believe that what we're talking about here, droves of people are leaving, reinventing their lives, starting something new. Are you hopeful that maybe the CEOs need to leave in droves so that new leaders can take over? So what's your point of view?
That's a great question, Will. I'll address the back one first. Yeah, yes, I'm hopeful. And I'm hopeful because I don't like the alternative. Just, yeah. So, and I'm also not naive. I've been around business for all of my adult life. I'm early 70s right now, so I've been in business for 50 plus odd years. There's a lot going on. And I think, back in the 60s, I got bit by this thing called Crusader rabbit. I'm going to date myself with this, but it's this altruism. It's this ideal. There's an ideal out there, and without this striving to move to utopia, progress never occurs. Will we get there? Honestly, I don't anticipate that I'm going to experience full scale compassionate capitalism in my lifetime. I mean, the runway in front of me is shorter than it is behind me right now. But I do know that unless I do something to quicken it, it's never going to happen. So, with your friend, capitalism and good people, they can coexist. As a matter of fact, I don't think capitalism can exist without good people. I really don't. Something will emerge. But we have economic models for a reason. People, exchange goods and services all the time. How does that get monetized, and how does that actually enable thriving? So, I love these questions because they put me down all kinds of rabbit holes, and I love this exploration.
Kind of piggybacking on that, we talked about why people are leaving. What do companies and leaders and businesses need to do to right the ship and to get people to stay?
I think one of the very first things that people need to do, and that companies and business owners need to do, is make sure that respect is part of the conversation. There's a notion of civil discourse that has been lost. And civil literally means, you have a point of view, I have a point of view, they may be divergent, but we can have a conversation about that. Rumi at one point in one of his writings said, let's meet someplace out in this field. I mean, it's a real butcher paraphrase, but let's meet out in this field that's away from both of our positions. And in that field, we can come together. Compromise is not a dirty word. Compromise is the way that progress occurs. It takes the best that we can find from both sides, and we find a platform that we can build together on. Does it take time? Yeah. Does it mean I get everything that I want? No. Only little kids think that they get everything that they want. Yeah, only little kids do that. Um, and we've got to actually have adults, positioned in these businesses. And I don't mean just at the C-suite. We need adults positioned throughout the business that make these sorts of decisions. Yeah, the idea of leadership, and I'll kind of speak to this for Will. Yeah, the way I define leadership, and we don't have leadership, by and large in this, and I'll just say in this country today, but I don't think we have it generally in the world today. Leadership is the activity of co-creating coordinated movement. Co-creating coordinated movement that gets us closer to an ideal. That gets us closer to an idea. Co-creating coordinated movement that creates actions that move us closer to an ideal. It's not command and control. It's not my way or the highway. Co-creation, ownership transfers, coordinated movement. How do we do this dance? And when we step on each other's toes, and we will step on each other's toes doing this dance, how do we agree to make sure that that doesn't become a reason to not keep dancing? Because we don't know how to do this dance well. We really don't. Compassion and capitalism is such an oxymoron for most people. But it's a dance that I think can be learned. It truly is. I don't think that rational people looking forward don't want to pay the price that not addressing the way that capitalism is structured today is going to cause us to pay. I mean, you look at the storms that are coming. I won't go down that rabbit hole. I promise. Okay.
Love that. Rodney Williams, are you on the line? I know you're on mute. Rodney? He might be on mute. So Rodney is the CEO of Belvedere, Bodkin, one of my dear friends. He's also a core community member, but he's doing a lot in terms of sustainability at Belvedere, which is also an LVMH company. And so I wanted to kind of tip my hat out to Rodney Williams. If you're on there, he might be taking another meeting while he's on this call, Rodney. But he's doing so much in terms of and his team, around DEI, around sustainability. And so when you think about Will's comment about are people actually doing good, are CEOs actually doing good, I'm going to point out to Rodney Williams, who is a CEO of Belvedere, one of the biggest spirits brand, who actually made a movement of trying to do good in the world through sustainability and through diversity and inclusion. And, he walks the walk. So tip of my hat to Rodney. Anyone else have a question for Blaine? We have probably one last question. Anyone want to unmute and ask their question? No? Okay, so
hi, it's Rajat.
Hi, Rajat.
Thanks, Blaine.
Hello,
thanks,
Rajat.
Dan, for this entire conversation. It's been wonderful. I just had a question about, the transition of language from the Great Resignation to what I've been reading recently, to the Great Rebalancing or the Great Restructuring. I don't know whether I'm getting the words correctly. But somehow I think companies and the population in general have not reacted well to the terminology of the Great Resignation. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah. Language is such a fascinating mechanism through which we conduct the business of being human. Yeah, language both creates reality, it also reflects reality from my perspective. So, in the language that's being used today, I think it's an artifact of an older model, and we're calling it the Great Resignation. I don't think it's a great resignation. It looks like people are resigning. I think it's a great, if I was to make another word up.
Wait, my friend Nita actually calls it the Great Awakening.
Yeah, that's essentially where I was going to be going with this. It's a great reclamation. People reclaiming their autonomy, they're reclaiming their meaning, they're reclaiming their power, they're reclaiming their right to master their life. So it's a great reclamation. And whether it is or isn't the point here, but just notice the effect that having a different linguistic description what possibility does it open? How I describe something determines how I feel about it. How I feel about it generates my behavior. And that trying to change somebody's behavior is a fool's errand. I've been married long enough to know that. Okay, but I can change description. I can change how people are describing things. And if I change how they're describing something, it changes how they feel about it. When they start to feel differently about it, they start to behave differently. That's part of the idea with compassionate capitalism. Change the way people are describing this thing that we call business, this thing we call capitalism. Put compassion into it. How do I feel about it if it's got compassion in it? What's the behavior that invites? Those sorts of dynamics come as a consequence of language. Language creates reality.
So Blaine, last question. You've been a champion of compassionate capitalism for over 2 decades now, and there's movement that is finally happening, right? Because of the Great Awakening, because of the Business Roundtable changing its mission statement, because of CEOs like David Diamond who are moving the needle, as well as the World Economic Forum kind of doing the same. For this next, for compassionate capitalism to take hold, what's the next thing? If you could dream a dream, what are the next things that need to happen for compassionate capitalism to turn its tide, from moving from the Ayn Rand kind of rational self-interest, maybe moving back to the invisible hands and Adam Smith kind of notion of that we are connected and we're all connected beings, right? How do we move back towards that?
Oh, I love that question, Lan. I think there's 2 things that come to mind for me. One has to do with the way that we define success, sustainable success in life or in business. Sustainable success is developing the capacity to continuously start over. That's what sustainable success is, developing the capacity to continuously start over. I think we're at a point where we actually need to consciously and deliberately start over. And that begs the question, what do we hold on to? What do we let go of? And what do we need to learn new? And I think one of the things that we need to learn new is that business needs to see itself as a center of distribution, not as a center of accumulation. Nature, everything in nature serves as a center of distribution in some way, shape, or form. There is nothing in nature long-term that serves as a center of accumulation. Things that you find in nature that are solely organized around accumulation, the Dead Sea is an example. They ultimately end up polluting and becoming toxic. Centers of distribution, it flows. Life is a reciprocity. Everything needs to be moving all of the time, including cash. Cash is energy. If cash is accumulated, if energy is allowed to accumulate and pool up in certain areas without being distributed, the entire thing becomes toxic. And it's that toxicity that gets us in trouble.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking altruistic. I'm not talking socialism. I'm not talking about any of that stuff. I'm talking about a shift in mindset.
So really quick.
See ourselves.
Really quick, Rodney Williams, do you want to unmute unmute yourself and come on? So William was talking about needing more CEOs that are actually moving the needle. Rodney, do you want to unmute? I know you were in the other room, so you couldn't talk. Kind of give us your POV, being kind of like a CEO of a major kind of company.
Well, I think Blaine has said it so well, that language is critical, but what I take, just even from your point that you just made about distribution, businesses are part of a community. And the community extends beyond our fiduciary relationships to suppliers and such. But really, we are agents of employment, of support within a respective community. And once you see that as sort of a focal point, more than just maximizing shareholder value, I think it opens the organization up to prioritize some different things. So at Belvedere, we were able to, we're 95% carbon neutral in our operations now, because we've been working on this since 2012. And it wasn't, it was literally a group of employees who said, hey, I think we can do better and save the organization money, but do better for the community. So that's the exciting thing I think about it. And your point about language being critical is so true.
Love that.
I love it.
Awesome. I'm so glad we got your input, Rodney, before you had to hop off. So it's 5 o'clock right now. If you guys can all put this on gallery mode, turn on your video cameras, turn on your volume, because Blaine and also Rodney too for his last comment deserve a round of applause. Unmute yourself. Videos on. Thank you so much, Blaine. That was amazing. Thank you for everyone.
My pleasure, Len.
That was awesome. I'm so glad we got a surprise guest at the end too, Rodney. I know how busy you are, so that was amazing. Well, thank you, everyone. We will see you at the next, and make sure you support Blaine, buy his book. I know we have a few people who bought it. In the email that I sent you guys earlier today, there's a link for his book, and for the folks who are on live stream, I'll also kind of have the link so you can buy it as well. You can buy it on Amazon, any of the big bookstores as well. Have an amazing time, guys. See you later. Thanks again.